guide for the Ice Spear / Winter Orb character. So basically the idea for this character is that I wanted to see how good Ice Spear would be on Totems, and turns out it's pretty good at single target damage, at least if the target remains relatively still. And it looked like it was going to be kind of nutty even before the skill came out. So initially the plan was going to be farm for Adziri's Mirror, run to the rings from Hydra. There, they give the +1 projectile, and then just all the cold damage and shit, and then just go to town. But they obviously nerfed the rings pretty badly. Snake Pit, I believe they're called. So we kind of abandoned that idea, went back to normal Kikazaru setup. And this is what we have. So the links are Added Cold, Winter Orb, GMP, Hypo, Faster Casting, and Control Destruction. Now, these aren't necessarily the optimal links for Winter Orb, but you could just swap in Winter Orb and it does fine damage here and better clear than Ice Spear in most cases, I would say. So that's what I do typically. You can also clear the Ice Spear, it's just really not that great. You could also probably sub in Freezing Pulse and be fine, but you're kind of losing the damage slot on GMP. And you could replace multiple gems, you could put a Cold Pen in there, but it might just be a bit of a pain in the ass, right? So I figured just use Winter Orb, and that'll make it like a very easy swap, but you can do that as well. In terms of the gear, pretty standard for a Totem character. Just I have the +1 to Ice Spear helm, really strong scepter here with the incursion mod. I think incursion mods are very underrated for anything that needs cast speed, basically. Always want that. Oh, apparently I did not have the right belt in here when I was doing the other video, but it's fine, really, because pretty much showed what I wanted to show. But you would usually have a Stygian. My Stygian has 90-some life, so the life on this build will be higher. And it probably covers a bunch of my res, which I didn't even have capped, so I did that map without capped res, boys. But yeah, I was putting this in for Flame Dash testing purposes, but that would be what would go in here. And then I have a Dance of the Offered. I like these boots. Some people don't like them. I do like them. I just think it's nice to be able to have the Onslaught. Frees up the Flask for something a bit more defensive. And so that's what I like about it. This is pretty expensive, this league, but it's really good. Offers the Blind, and then the automatic chill, the pen, which is basically insane. And this is kind of the oddity of the build, I guess. If you didn't want to use this, you would just use like a standard spell damage shield. If you really want to do heavy damage, you go dual wand or dual scepter or whatever, and you get you run around with Flame Dash, but then you're just a lot slower. So it's kind of like up to you what you want to do there, but you're just not the fastest if you do that. Shield allows you to go much faster. This shield is basically just to test out the spell leech. Now I kind of like it on Winter Orb itself. It's not so good on Ice Spear just because I feel like the damage is too delayed, comes out too slow. It's kind of just too sketchy. The times when the leech does save you, it doesn't. It feels like you could have just died there anyway. So it's not a very good synergy with Ice Spear, in my opinion, most of the time. The only time I would really recommend it is it's kind of good on boss fights where if you lose your life flask and you otherwise would have trouble sustaining, you can actually just cast your totems. If they hit the boss, even if they're not doing like a ton of damage, because you don't have all your buffs up and stuff, they're still leeching a lot to you. So there's that aspect of it, but not too good on Ice Spear otherwise. Very good on Arc, though, and pretty good on Winter Orb. So, yeah, that's the idea. Pretty much standard totem build. I have the Arcane Surge on the Frost Bomb right here, and that works fine for me, but you could put on something else if you wanted. Got the Shield Charge set up as standard, and the Lightning Golem. Now, if we open up this, basically, you're just choosing between Conviction of Power here and Sanctuary of Thought. Now, there's a ton of different mindsets. In this league, I almost think that taking Sanctuary of Thought sometimes would be better because you're dealing with kind of like one-shot mechanics, so you really just want as much effective HP as possible, and this is just going to give you more effective upfront HP than this. Now, the one good thing about this is you get endurance charges, which endurance charges are good for resistances. They're good for, you know, just reducing physical damage taken, and then also if you have Immortal Call, cast more damage taken, then when you consume three endurance charges with the Immortal Call, you're actually going to get a decently long Immortal Call setup. So I kind of like that about it. It's basically a toss-up. The 5% damage isn't super relevant in my opinion, and the power charges are nice, but again, not totally relevant. And the thing is, you can generate them anyway if you just have a Orb of Storm set up with power charge on crit and stuff like that. And Orb of Storm is power charge on crit, increased duration with Arcane Surge, and then you're fine. Then you just cast this. You put this in a different slot and cast it, you know, on your own time. But yeah, so ultimately I think it's just something that's not super necessary taking this, and you may be better off with this. The only problem with doing this is that when you are on full energy shield, it's actually impossible to get Arcane Surge stacks, which is kind of bad. So yeah, there's that. But you can circumnavigate that in a couple ways. You can use the gloves that give energy shield, or you can use the what do you call it? The jewel that gives 100% increased, not energy shield, sorry, the gloves that give mana cost, or you can do the mana cost from the jewel. So either one of those work if you really want to keep this, have that up all the time with this, but you could also just run it, and to be honest, when you're using your energy shield and you're just going through maps, because you don't have a ton of things to get the energy shield back up, it's not always going to be at full all the time, so you kind of are able to still use your Arcane Surge most of the time. And yeah, so there's a couple different options there. You could also just get Arcane Surge from other things too. There's a lot more sources of it now in the game, so you know, there's tons of ways to get Arcane Surge if that was really a problem. But yeah, so the build, pretty standard build here, except for coming down here. Now we come down here to get piercing shots. Other people do this build. They go Ascendant, and they get the Deadeye Pierce, and then they get like the Hierophant extra totem or something. I think Ascendant is just trash for totem builds in general, because it's like, so you're not actually, like, having to use the new totem support is pretty suboptimal unless you're doing something very specific with the build that cannot be done like without using that thing. Like, so the only time I would use it is if you need to use another Ascendancy to make the build functional. I actually have used it in an Arc build this league, Arc Totem build, and you know, I think in that particular build, to do what I wanted to do, it was necessary to use the totem support. But in a build like this, it's not good, because it's like, if you take Ancestral Bond and then you get the Hyro Node, you're already at 3 totems. If you use Soul Mantle, you're at 4 totems. Now, if you use the gem, you're at 6 totems, and you're kind of incentivized to use the gem, because if you go Scion, there's actually no way to get the dual placement of the totems at a time, which is actually really good in most cases. There are some cases where you really don't want to, it's not that you don't want to place 2 at a time, but you don't like the fact that they're 2 on top of each other. But I'd say, by and large, it's really good that you're placing 2 at a time, especially for like auto-target abilities or very wide clear abilities like Freeze Pulse or Arc. So yeah, you want to have the 2 totem things, but if you use that and you have all these other plus totem sources, you're at 6 totems, which is very overkill in my opinion. And you're placing, I don't know if you'd actually place 4 totems. I think you'd chill just place 2 totems at a time, but you have 6 totems and you're giving up a slot. It's really only useful on single target, and it's barely useful because you're getting the huge less multiplier there. So it's just kind of like, ugh, like, do I really, you don't want to do this. Like, I kind of just want my totems being individually stronger. That way they freeze better on trash and stuff like that. You don't need the extra totems on trash anyway. So I'm just not a fan of using the multiple totem support when necessary in Hyro. When it's not necessary in Hyro or Scion, kind of forces you into that. Plus, you get a lot of nice regen from here. You get the more damage now, the placement speed. It's just like Hyro is so hard to beat with any type of totem build that the only way you're really going to beat it is if you need something specific. And the Pierce, you don't need it enough to the point where you just can't do the build without it, because you can easily come down here and get it. Pathing to these life nodes is fine. So this might be a bit a standard, but it's nothing terrible. And then coming down here, getting the piercing shots is not really that many more points. Now, something you've noticed with this build is that it's a very health light. Even when we put the Stygian Vise in, which I could actually go grab right now if we want, just to show you the HP totals, it's still not going to have a ton of life, right? And that's a bit problematic in this league because things hit very hard. But I've made another version of the build that has a lot more life, and I will show you that one in a second. So I'm just going to plop that on there. And you can see we go up, it actually went up a lot more than I thought. We're actually at pretty much like, 4.4, 4.5k life, which is actually pretty respectable for a build that uses Soul Mantle, and we do have a lot of mana from MLM. So this build isn't terribly, like non-tanky or anything like that. It's just that the mobs are actually outrageous. So, yeah, they're just pretty much absurd. And that's how hard they hit. That they're still a danger to builds like this. But if this was like a normal league, you'd be fine with this amount of life. Now, because the amount of life is low, I've gone and made another build that gets more life. And the idea is that if you notice on this tree, it's a pretty typical totem tree, right? It's a lot of crit multi, getting the life where you can, but it's basically focusing on crit, very crit centric. Now the other build is more focusing on only the multi. So for example, we don't really take the Doomcast thing, even though there's multi in here, because it's really more of a crit cluster. I don't think we take this because it's a crit cluster mostly. We get crit multi, and then we basically, the idea is the skill has a lot of crit anyway, especially combined with the Diamond Flask, so don't stack the crit, skimp on the crit, get extra life. And just to give you a reference for frame of mind with this build, I was getting like 2.5 mil per totem under optimal conditions with everything popped with the Dying Sun, stuff like that, which you absolutely do not need for this build because it already does way too much damage without it. But if you had everything popped under optimal circumstances, you're getting like 2.5 million per totem. You can get this up to 4k or 4 mil in some cases if you really go crazy with the gear and stuff like that, which is absolutely just insane for 4 totems. Or, yeah, it's 4 totems in this case, right? Yep, 4 totems. But, yeah, so, and actually, if you were to get the extra totem crap in the shield, it'd be 5 totems. And to explain one thing about that, if you don't want to use the life on this, then I would highly recommend getting a shield with the +1 totem. Because, first of all, the +1 totem is going to add more damage than any damage stat on the shield, just outright. And then having a 5th totem is really good because when you're placing totems, since they place in pairs of 2, what happens is if you go to recast, you're like, you place a totem, then you place a totem, then you go to place another one, both of these disappear, right? And with Ice Spear, it's kind of annoying because the placement of the totems is actually very important for how damage gets done to the boss. If they're too close, they don't go into the second form fast enough, and if the boss moves even a little, the projectiles won't hit the boss, right? So that's bad. And if they're too far away, then they're going to cast, the boss can just move out of the way before the abilities hit. So there's like a sweet spot where, they're changing into the second form and all of them are pretty much hitting the boss before the boss really has a chance to move around too much. And like I'd say if Alva is the boss, like you kind of want them like here or something, you know, or like maybe here, something like that. That's probably like the optimal distance. And the idea is that when you put another set of totems down, the prior ones go away. So if you have 5 totems, one of these totems will actually stay out. Only one of them is going to go away. And that's going to help because your totem here is still going to be doing damage. So when you have to reposition other totems, it's not just going to completely wipe out the ones that were already in good position. You're going to have one at least that's still doing damage. So just a little side note there on why 5 totems is actually a really good threshold if you can hit that. But yeah, so I'm going to go log on the other character, and it's not really geared, but I'm just going to show you how the build is different, like where you go differently in the tree, right? So, as you can see, I was a bit salty about the betrayal situation when making this character. And, oops, okay. So, you can see no crit here. Don't even go up to get Cruel Prep, actually. Just come through here, and then go right into the life wheel, get a lot of placement speed. This is also Hyro, so we're getting, typically you wouldn't really need to get this in a lot of cases, but you're getting Totemic Zeal with higher placement speed, which is just nutty. And then you're still getting the piercing shots and yeah, getting all the other health and stuff. So you're eventually, this is where you go and get the rest of the crit multi. This build is not finished, it's level 88. I just kind of got bored of playing it because I was playing the other build and this one. They're both the same build essentially, just slightly different. I wanted to test them out, you know, practically speaking. And yeah, this one does die a lot less. I think the only time this one died actually was in a burial chamber to degen, which was just me being like not the keyboard basically. So yeah, it doesn't really die to betrayal stuff nearly as much because you have just so much raw MOM power. When the build is actually geared and you have all your life nodes, you're at like 6k life. So you have 6k life with the MOM as opposed to being at 4k life with the MOM. Huge difference for the regen even and everything. So, because you get regen from Hyro. So yeah, it's just a lot better of a build in terms of staying alive. Obviously it does less damage. This one did more like, the other one I said did 2.5 mil when everything active. This one's more like 800k to like 1.1 mil with everything active. So half or less of the damage, but still do a lot of damage and still a very powerful build. And then one more thing I wanted to go over is why we actually get Pierce here. Now, theoretically, if you're only using Winter Orb or Freezing Pulse to clear, you don't need this at all. So you can actually save 5 points here entirely if you do that. Now, initially when I made these though, I was using Ice Spear to clear. And if you're using Ice Spear to clear, you really need some form of Pierce. And the reason for that is because there are going to be circumstances where the mobs crowd your totems, because there are a lot of fast-moving mobs in the game and stuff like that. And if your spear is coming out and only hitting one mob, what's happening is one spear is killing a mob, it's not getting to transform, and then if you have a lot of projectiles and you have like a dying sun, you'll actually still sort of clear decent, and it'll be looking like you're clearing decent. Because so many spears are coming out, you're killing the mobs in front of the totems, and then the next set of spears is doing the actual clear. But what's happening is you're still losing tons of clear, because the idea is if those initial spears survived and didn't die immediately to the first mobs, they would be immediately starting on the second part of clear, right? So you want to get the pierce to make sure that your initial spears can survive the initial impact of like a couple mobs being there and still go on to pierce other things. Because if that doesn't happen, it's just going to really slow down your clear, and you know it's going to be like weird because you're going to place some totems, things aren't going to die, you're going to be like, what the fuck? So you really need some form of pierce. Whether you go fucking Scion and get it, which I think is terrible, or you just grab this, you could use the Pierce Gem if you really wanted to, but I think this is the easiest option if you're going to actually use Ice Spear. So that is why you get Pierce. Another option I was contemplating is running a Blasphemy projectile weakness, but I don't know. It's just going to be weird because a lot of the hits aren't going to be affected by the blasphemy really, especially because you're not getting any AoE nodes or AoE, so it's not going to be a very big AoE. It's probably going to do its job in terms of allowing your totems to pierce stuff that's close to them if you're close to your totems, but it's not going to be 100% if you place your totems far away, and ultimately I think it's just going to be a bit clunky. I think self-casting projectile weakness on things in front of the totems is just a bit cumbersome. So I think really getting Pierce is just your best option. And speaking of Pierce, it brings me to my final point, which I'm going to log back over onto the main guy for, which is the Helm enchant. Now, the Helm enchant we have here is fires an additional projectile. I think there seems to be a lot of debate from what I see with people picking helms of this and the 30% faster transformation into stage 2. Now, initially, I thought that it would be no contest and that the stage 2 transform would be by and far away like the best enchant to use in this, bar none. And I'm thinking the logic there is basically just like, well, if we get to phase 2 faster, then we solve a ton of problems, right? Like you're a lot more basically forgiving. You can be forgiven a lot more for where you place the totems because it doesn't matter as much because they're still transforming. The problem is that the area that the spear takes to transform is already very small, which is relevant because you're only getting 30% of that back, basically, right? So the time it takes from the transform is already very small, so it's only 30% of the small area. So ultimately, I decided it wasn't worth it. I mean, you can play with it yourself, and if you feel like it's worth it for you, then by all means use it, because getting one extra Ice Spear projectile here is not the end of the world. But it is a nice damage boost for bosses on single target when you're using especially multiple totems, because it's one projectile extra on every set of casts from every totem. So it's kind of a lot of damage, but if you feel that the build just plays better with the other enchant, then by all means, grab that one. So, yeah, that's pretty much the build and a lot of the logic behind the decisions. And, yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the comments. And, other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.